Welcome to the Boosting Achievement ESL podcast. I am your host, Dr. Carol Salva. In this podcast, I'm chronicling my journey of learning about the best ways to support multilingual learners and the teachers who teach them. I always want to say thank you to Voice Ed Radio, even though this is a YouTube edition. I want to say thank you to Voice Ed for producing this show, and wherever you get your podcasts, I appreciate you. So my guest for this episode 116 is author and incredible educator, Larry Ferlazzo. I'm excited about this new book that he has written, and it just came out. We are at the end of March 2023, but I had already pre-ordered more than one copy. So mine are on the way to my house. It's the Student Motivation Handbook. 50 ways to boost an intrinsic desire to learn. How can we boost that? And so Larry, I have said for years, he is a top tip. He is a top follow. I tell everyone, if you're just going to follow one person, this is the guy. I've learned so much and changed my practice. So I knew this was going to be a really good book. I can't wait for him to tell you more about it. And we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about some of the real challenges that educators are facing and how some of these concepts can support the very important work that you do. So without further ado, let's go over and listen to this conversation that I had with the amazing Larry Ferlazzo. Hello, Larry Ferlazzo. It is so wonderful to have you on the show.
Well, great. It's an honor to be on it again.
Well, I know you're a favorite, so we are so glad you're back. And I can't tell you how excited I am about the new book. Thank you for offering me a sneak peek. I have been sharing about it, and I want to tell you real quick something that happened in a district. But first, let me just start with you. Please, you probably need no introduction, but can you tell folks just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have been a teacher for a little over 20 years at Luther Burbank High School in Sacramento, California, where I teach English language learners and English proficient students. I teach ELL classes in English and in history, and also international baccalaureate classes. And prior to becoming a teacher, I was a community organizer for 19 years. And I've written some books, and I play pickleball, and I play basketball. So those are a few things about me.
There's so many things you're doing. There's so many things you're doing. And people...
And I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you by saying I have written some books, and you have contributed chapters to some of those books that Katie Hull and I have written, which I appreciate. We both appreciate.
Thank you so much. It's an extreme honor to be featured in any of your work. It's just stellar. And everywhere I go, I am recommending that people follow you. That's a top tip. You're a fantastic filter, because people have, there's so much out there on the internet. And so if you can just find a filter that you trust, then you don't have to be like a Twitter junkie, because this filter that is requested is the Twitter junkie, and so, or Facebook and stuff. And so I love how much you share on social media, and you share for free, and and you're writing for multiple outlets like the New York Times and Education Week, and your blogs and things. It's really a service to us all. So thank you, and any part of that I get to support is a thrill for me. But I do, everywhere I go, I tell people, well, if you're just going to follow one guy, this is the guy. And so we were in a district on Monday, and the book is not quite out yet while Larry and I are recording, but it's coming out in the next day or two.
Actually, it is. It's out today.
Yay! Yay! So it's on its way to so many of us. I've ordered more than one copy, more than one physical copy, because it's a perfect gift, and I just can't wait. I want to have the actual book in my hand too. And so I was telling folks about it, and Thank you for doing the free Twitter chat. We'll talk about that also. But I was in this district before it was out, and I was telling folks to pre-order it. Actually, it was even before that. What we were discussing was um, the fact that they're having trouble getting their district program leaders, different campuses. The multilingual department was having trouble seeing teachers implement the things that they're training them on. The sheltered instruction that the students need, that's always going to be a challenge. Is okay, well, they got it, they liked the training, but then we didn't see it happening in classrooms, so how do we support implementation? And I said, okay, so let's talk through why we think that they're not doing it. And it really came down to motivation, because they don't really value it, it seems like, or they might think it's too hard. Or I was like, okay, there are these 4 things that if you follow Larry Ferlazzo, he talks quite a bit. He's done lots of research over the years on motivation, and we just listed out what those are, um, and talked about, it doesn't matter if you run a factory or if you run a, a company or anything. Understanding how people find their motivation is important in our work. And everything they said, we could come back to, well, are we giving them any choice? Do they feel good at the strategies that they're doing? What is our relationship with like with these educators? And it was just funny because I started talking about the book, and I had a sneak peek, and I said, let me just see what it says here, but I bet you I already know what it says. And I felt so validated. And I just gotten a peek at the sneak peek, and it truly aligned. I was like, do I know this guy or what? Do I know? Because it has really changed my practice to be following you and the things that you've put out in the past about motivation, but it's also, um, just as a person, how I work with teachers, and definitely how I work with students. So thank you. Thank you for putting so much of it out there for us.
Well, I got to thank you for speaking of being out there. You're out there. I don't know how many traveler points you get with the mileage that you put on, that you're out there helping districts and schools all around the country. And
Thank
as you know, in our ELL teacher survival book, Katie and I just recommend 3 organizations for educators to get support from, and your organization, is it pronounced Seidlitz or Seedlitz?
Seidlitz. Yeah, you're right.
Seidlitz
Seidlitz.
is one of those 3, along with the National Writing Project and the Wright Institute. So you're always, you and Valentina and other folks are just all over the place, and that's great that
Well,
somebody's putting out some decent PD for educators.
thank you. Thank you. We're super honored by that, because yeah, we're pretty passionate about what we do, and we're not a very big organization. So we are spread out quite a bit. But it's good. It's really good when we're all saying the same basic things and it's interrelated. What we do, we have our own area of specialization, but then we all work to try to help teachers see that what we're doing, and I know you write about this too, what we're doing for our multilingual learners is going to benefit the entire class. It's going to be good for all of our students. So it brings me back. Thank you again, and thank you to Katie for recommending us. But it brings me back to the book is not specifically for teachers of multilingual learners only. This is not an EL specific
That's
book,
right.
right?
Yes, I mean, I think it's for teachers across the board, and just as good ELL teaching is good teaching for everybody, these motivational sort of universals make sense for all teachers. And just as most of my day is spent not in ELL classes, though I have ELLs in all of my classes, as do all of the classes at our school, since we're 40% ELL. But it works across the board a lot. But this way, it works a lot.
Well, it's one of the things that I hear the most is, so the name of the book is the Motivation Handbook.
The
Is
Student
there
Motivation Handbook, yes.
the Student Motivation Handbook? And
50 ways to boost student intrinsic motivation. I'm sorry, the Student Motivation Handbook, 50 ways to boost an intrinsic desire to learn. I think that's what it is. Okay. 50 ways to boost an intrinsic desire to learn. Yes, that's the subtitle.
And I love so many things about just the title. First of all, it's a handbook. So it's not that you have to read it cover to cover, like in order. It's the type of guide where you can look at the table of contents and something can catch your eye and you can go straight to that with 50 different things. This might, okay, I know that. I know that. Oh, here's something I haven't heard of. And you could dive right into a particular suggestion. Just skimming over it, I already saw things that I was like, oh, I'm gonna do that. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. And you have it in categories based on what your years of experience. That's how I knew what you might say are the big things that support people finding their motivation, because you've done a lot of research on this and you've written other books about helping students find intrinsic motivation, right?
Yes, I've written 3 other books and wanted to do something specifically related to intrinsic motivation. And I wanted to do something that was different and that I thought be particularly helpful to teachers and would be helpful to me. I mean, I think any of the books that I write need to be helpful to me, both in the writing process and also to help remind me when I, in the midst of the messiness and the chaos of teaching, it's easy to forget.
That's what struck me about it, is even just looking at the table of contents, it's practical. It's a very practical handbook. So you could look at, you've got things categorized into different things that research shows support people finding their own motivation. And under those categories, there are all these activities. So if you as an educator feel like, well, I'm pretty good with relationships, or I'm pretty good with this kind of thing, you could skip that and go to something that you're like, I don't think I offer enough of this, or I want to know more about being able to offer enough of this. And then it's just boom, 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 very succinct, very to the point, finding these activities. So I think everybody really loves something like that, especially right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that certainly all of us in the classroom are experiencing challenges in the classroom that both predated the COVID epidemic and have been made worse. And I think that the timeliness of this, seemed to work well. I mean, the research is pretty definitive that the primary categories, the primary elements that support intrinsic motivation in anything are autonomy, competence, relatedness, and relevance. And I mean, good teachers know, I mean, maybe they can't necessarily put them in those tidy categories, but good teachers and experienced teachers know that those elements play a key role in a successful classroom where students are engaged. And I think what I wanted to do on this book is just sort of put a bunch of ideas that I have tried, and based on what I have learned from others, and also in the book, I share things I tried that didn't work and why and what I do instead. So, and again, it's not a question of saying extrinsic motivation bad, intrinsic motivation good, because many of us are motivated, can be motivated by both, right? I mean, I was motivated to become a better teacher by reading the book. Doesn't hurt that maybe I'll make some royalties out of it, right? So, but the issue is, where do we tend? What side of the coin do we tend to fall on? Do we tend to prioritize? And do we automatically just go to one? Do we reflect? And I think the other thing that I wanted to do in the book is each of the chapters also includes a number of questions to ask, to ensure that we are to ask ourselves, and that I ask myself, to ensure that we are implementing some of these strategies through a culturally responsive lens.
Nice.
Because it's easy just to get seduced by a menu of things without adding and acknowledging the importance of looking at our own biases, looking at the assets, the cultural gifts that our students have. So we've got to do both, I think. And that latter part of the cultural responsiveness can sometimes be pushed to the side.
Absolutely. And I think these things kind of fold back onto themselves, because one of those things that you talk about relatedness and the relationships that we have with students. But what does that really mean? Because we all know, I mean, I can remember being a brand new teacher going, well, I'm going to have great relationships. They're all going to be my friends. We're not even going to need classroom management.
Right.
But a lot of brand new teachers find that that's not the right approach. That's not what we mean. And, so it's interesting, like the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Mhm.
There's a big difference. And so understanding that this must be a difficult journey, but honoring the hard work that, let's say, a language learner is doing, that the difficulty of it, and then making sure they know, it gets easier every day that you do this, that kind of a relationship on honoring what they bring, honoring that it's difficult, and then having the kind of relationships where you're building kids up and showing them their wins so that they start to build a sense of competence. Those kind of things are all just kind of folding onto themselves. I feel like if you do the kind of things that you tell us to focus on, and then ask yourself the kind of questions that you're putting in there, it would be hard not to see the
Yeah,
connection.
and certainly, you're looking at those four elements of autonomy, competence, relatedness, and relevance. I mean, they're all sort of interrelated as well. It's not just separate, completely separate silos, but certainly one way to strengthen the relationship and enhance a sense of competence. What a lot of researchers talk about are sharing struggle stories of not only students reading about the struggles that some of the people that they admire went through in order, before they achieved success, but also to write their own
Nice.
struggle stories, and for teachers to share theirs. For example, I mean, I often share, especially with English language learners, my struggle story of trying to learn Spanish, right? So, and obviously that also strengthens the relationship as well. But it doesn't have to be a language story. I mean, all teachers have experienced struggles, and obviously there are lines of what we share and what we don't share. But certainly I can share my struggles in learning Spanish. I can certainly share about my struggles losing my father at an early age. I mean, there are points of connection that we can make with all of our students, while at the same time, you talk to, we don't have to be friends, but what Rick Wormley wrote in one of my Ed Week columns, he said, but we can certainly be very friendly.
Nice.
So there are a lot of strategies that overlap all three of those categories.
Absolutely.
All four of those
All
categories.
four of them. And the that's another thing that I like is that you highlight other teachers and ideas that they have and they're implementing in their classrooms. There was one that I'd never thought about, the way that the teacher talked with students about the difference between like a community of learners
Mhm, mhm.
versus a classroom, and just a standard classroom. And
Yeah, a classroom of students or a community of learners.
yes,
Yeah, and she was great. I mean, I had written about that in one of my previous books on motivation, and she had taken that lesson and she wrote about it. And uh, I thought she wrote about it much more eloquently than I originally wrote about it. And she graciously, she sent me an email and she graciously agreed to let me reprint it.
yeah,
So,
it was
yeah,
a
I mean, a lot of these ideas, you put ideas in the world, people make them better. Uh, People share ideas. Maybe I make them a little different,
yeah.
and people are open to sharing. And
It's very flattering when they do that, I'm sure, that they
mhm.
take your idea and tweak it and then come back to you and say, "Look at this, it worked.
Yeah,
It's a little different, but it worked."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then that gave me a lens to look through, and I did like how she talked about how many it wasn't this quick thing. It was conversations, it was getting them to help, it was very student centered where they were talking about what it looks like and what it could be. And then she had them, read something, and kind of categorize where things would go. Is that an example of a community of learners or a classroom of students? And then it
Yeah,
was the next assignment, they were still connecting back to that, is really a great example.
yeah, and that's something I try to do near the beginning of a school year. To I don't really go over sort of class rules because the basic rules are your respect. Don't touch my stuff. I won't touch your stuff. Respect each other. That stuff. But what is the bigger cultural norms do we want to have? And then that's where I think that's where that teacher used to talk about the difference between a classroom of students and a community of learners, and then what do we want?
Right.
And then we can refer to that throughout the year. I think that's uh, a better. It's a different way of looking at things than having a bunch of rules.
Right. Or even a social contract, the way I've always done it.
Mhm,
They're just different ways to do these things. And we
mhm.
don't get enough time to see other teachers teach or hear about what's working in their classrooms. So this was um it's just such a great book. I couldn't wait for it to come out because I knew it would be full of stuff like this. And then you also have the ed tech pieces throughout the tech connections to, well, if you want more, type this into your browser and you can see where
Mhm.
people have written about things extensively. So it's not just the 50 things.
Oh yeah, there's tons of links to additional resources, and people can go to the book's website on the publisher and download any of the student handouts, as well as the clickable list of all the ed tech resources without buying the book if they wish.
In Larry Ferlazzo true fashion, you do not need to buy this book. Go to the publisher and you can get a ton of it. And that's really generous of you, and wonderful that there are no barriers for anyone listening to be able to get some of this learning, because he's just one of the most generous people with.
Well, you're very kind.
Thank you. So, I do get a chance to work with high schools all across the United States and Canada right now, that I appreciate that opportunity. And overwhelmingly, Larry, what I'm hearing from teachers right now, if you're listening to this real time, we are in the second semester, right in the middle of the second semester, April timeframe. And teachers have for a couple months been telling me it's apathy. It's that kids don't care. That it's since the pandemic, more than ever, the secondary students that they're teaching don't seem to care. And what do I have for them? What do I have for them for kids who don't care? Are you seeing that it's different in your high school than it was before?
Well, there are some difference. There are some differences. I'm not sure if I find it that to that degree in terms of engagement, but there are clearly some differences, ranging from I think on the positive side, in terms of pre and post, we're not really post-pandemic, but pre-pandemic and now, I do have a sense that students tend to feel more independent. That, I mean, part of it is, I think, during the pandemic, many of them probably got jobs, had to take more responsibility for caring for siblings or elder care, that they were in more control of their time. So I think that is not really a bad thing. On the other side of things, I think there's much less of a feeling like I have to go to school every day. And part of that, I think, relates to job and more family care responsibilities that haven't necessarily changed, but also part of it is, I think people feel like I don't feel like going, so I'm not going to go. I mean, attendance is down, certainly across the board in the state, and certainly at our school. And chronic absenteeism is also more apparent. So I think that's pretty clear. I think I see much more reticence to want to, I mean, before the pandemic, in a typical class, I might have 2 or 3 students who would prefer to work alone. And when there's time for group activities, now I'd say there's at least triple that number.
Oh, wow.
Who would rather, and that those who want to work in groups primarily just want to work with their close friends, as opposed to randomized groups. There's much more reticence towards that. I think that's also attributable to the pandemic. Not that I have, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but that's my conjecture. And clearly, I refer at least double the number of students to our counselors for what I would consider fairly major mental health issues, and my sense is that those tend to last longer than they did before. So those are sort of the things that I see as the major changes so far in my classroom experience. I mean, clearly also cell phones, that I think pre-pandemic, I'd say 85% of the students have a pretty good sense of, I mean, everybody wants to use their cell phones, but could control, and 15% maybe had some issues. Now it's still, I think 85% have good control, but 50 or 15% is almost an obsession.
Wow.
Though I do want to say that it also appears to me that I don't see most of those changes in the English language learner population that I did work with. The cell phone, yes, cell phone issues, but I don't see, it's not as apparent to me in terms of attendance, major mental health issues. I mean, I think they always had more many had many familial responsibilities. So I do find that interesting. And I generally, during the pandemic, it seemed the obvious challenges of the pandemic did not seem as apparent in the ELL population that I dealt with than in the non-ELL population. Conjecture is, I mean, their experience, they developed a whole lot of resilience. Perhaps, just, you escape a civil war, the pandemic doesn't look that bad, right? I mean, it's,
I mean,
I mean, I don't know, but I mean that I clearly, but to get to your thing about apathy, I think when I was an organizer, we used to have a saying that there's no such thing as an apathetic person. Everybody is interested in something. It just may not be what we're interested in. So our challenge is to find out what they are interested in. So I think that has helped me work fairly effectively with dealing with engagement issues. And I think these strategies about intrinsic motivation, does it work with everybody? No, right? I mean, am I above using carrots or sticks? No, right? I mean, the other saying in organizing, we always talked about, we live in the world as it is, not the world that we like it to be. We need to work towards the world that we like it to be. But, we also, are not a Pollyanna. We've got to grapple with, the real challenges that are in our day-to-day classroom. And we don't necessarily always have time in that moment to to exercise intrinsic motivation strategies, right? I mean, it's sometimes we've got to use the carrots or sticks, but we need to talk to students about it afterwards or even during, about why we're doing it and what would be the better way.
I agree 100%. It's some of the things that you're talking about, like you said, veteran teachers might have some of these things under their belt already. They might just be calling it something different or not realizing that this is why it works. And they're a born teacher or a natural, you might say, but then they're probably have a heavy dose of relatedness, relationships with students, and they're fostering relationships between the students in a positive classroom culture in some way. They're offering some kind of choice where students feel like they have some control over their own destiny in some way. They're offering some kind of little wins where people start to feel a sense of competence and that self-efficacy that you talk about. And in some way, they are making what they're doing relevant to the students. And again, if you're listening and those things come natural to you, you might find that, you know what, kids are a little more motivated in my classroom, or I don't know what. My sister says this a lot. She's a new teacher in her 50s, and she says, the the kids, they work for me. They do well in my classroom, and I'll see them in other classrooms, and they're not well behaved, and I wonder why that is. And as I listen to how she interacts with them, you can see it. You can see the relationships. You can see it's something about her background in the business world has given her uh lens. And I bought this book for her because I feel like anybody who we're all doing these things to certain degrees, but I know that as a new teacher, I was not.
Mhm.
And I'm not my sister. I was not just naturally doing them. And even ironically, I left the classroom. I was a specialist for almost a decade. And then when I got put back in the classroom, it was very high stress. And I was trying to focus on language acquisition and the things the kids didn't have. And it was very deficit lens. I didn't mean to be that, but that's where my mind was, is the huge gaps kids had. And we weren't getting very far, Larry.
Mhm.
We were not. It was a few weeks where I just did a hard stop and went, I know I took over a class in the middle of the year. I know these kids are off the rails behavior wise, but it's gotta be better than this. Somebody out there knows, can help me. And if you fast forward, the second semester was so much better. And then by the end of the second semester, I can't even think of students that we had that weren't intrinsically motivated in some way. We were functioning so well. And when I look back, it was these things. Part of what I was doing, we even have a lot of it on video, and you can point out, okay, that worked because that child feels themselves getting better. Watch them get that high from getting these things, doing better. Um, it's like, if you do it
Yeah.
naturally, I promise this book is gonna take it to the next level. It will take it to the next level for you and make your job
Well,
easier.
well, it's interesting, you're talking about what teachers do without necessarily knowing where it fits into the category. Um, I mean, for years, I've always tried to create situations where students see for themselves the progress they make, right? Whether it is, beginning of a unit, write down, look at these lists of words, write down the definitions if you know any of them, and then a month later, same list, write down the definitions, and they see the
The
dramatic
growth.
improvement. Or
Yes.
give them, have them rewrite an essay at the end of the semester that they wrote at the beginning. And that makes a lot of sense. And I actually, learned a lot, through the research, is those are called temporal comparisons.
Temporal comparisons.
Yes. So the idea is to compare yourself to your past self, as opposed to comparing yourself to someone else or to
Wow.
something else. Right. But I mean, it's just interesting to know that's what it's called. And it makes sense. And that's what the research has shown, that it is. We know, right? I mean, good teachers know, yes, you want students to see their own growth, right? I mean, that there's nothing more powerful than for them to do. Well, I mean, there are things more powerful, but that's extremely powerful for students to see for themselves, instead of us telling them or somebody else telling them, or for them imagining it. A number of years ago, at the end of each year and at various points during the year, I have students do anonymous evaluations. And I tried an experiment. I did an evaluation where I had one question omitted. And well, no, I'm sorry. I put it this way. I had the question. I didn't have it omitted. So I did the survey, and I had students complete it. And one of the questions was how much, I forget what class, was how much English you felt like you learned this year. And students were able to do had it do a 1 to 5 graph of what they did. And then I said, oh, folks, I'm sorry, I forgot to add a question. So I'd like it, like a week later, I said, can you do this survey again? And in the interim, I had students do an activity where they had to rewrite an essay that they had written, 6 months earlier. And they rewrote it based on what they learned. And the scores, the number of people who said that they learned a lot of English during that year, like tripled in a week from what they had said the previous week prior to having done that, temporal comparison of themselves. So I wanted to see what kind of impact that would actually have. And because of all the mistakes I make in the year, students clearly believe that I just had, they just assumed that, yeah, another one of those mistakes that Ferlazzo made. So we have to do this again. Okay. They forgot. It's this question. So they didn't know,
Right?
So it was interesting to see that it
It
really
is.
does have that kind of impact.
It does. Did you end up showing them, this is what you thought a week or so ago?
I
Here's what
did not. I did not to them. I mean, it helped me, but I mean, in retrospect, I should have showed them too. But
well,
they knew, but they felt that they had. The
yeah,
important
they
thing was
felt
that they realized that they had learned a lot, right?
that's
I
the
think
thing. That's what you want. That,
right,
I'm sure what you're saying falls under that sense of competence.
right, exactly. Yes.
And I've tried to explain that to others in this way, that it's not that I've mastered something. It's that I feel myself getting better. I can see it. I reflect and notice it, either a little win in the moment or over time, that reflection that you're talking about. Hey, I'm getting better at this.
And
It's
I know that means I know I can get better in the future.
right. It gives you, it's more, to me, it's beyond a growth mindset. That research is really important. It's not new to our field. But
Mhm,
people are like, but how do you give them that mindset?
mhm.
You create conditions where that mindset grows. You create conditions where they are offered the opportunity to see themselves growing. Um, One of the things that I did in the beginning, this resonates with me a lot because I teach students with limited education, and they're not going to see the success on a standardized test the first semester that they arrive if they have limited literacy in secondary. That has been my experience, because it's not that they can't learn and become literate in this repertoire of language that they have very quickly. We're not talking about a disability, but it's just within the first few months, a translation device, something in your native language is not helpful if you don't have literacy in your heritage language. So it can be very defeating to have them sit for standardized tests, and they have to. I
Oh
did.
yeah. I mean, I have a new student who is not a Spanish speaking student who's not literate in Spanish. I'm just focused on having a peer tutor use flashcards to teach Spanish to
And
them. Right? I mean,
they're gonna learn so fast. Anything we can engage them with is the most inspiring thing. But first of all, something you wrote a while back that really changed a lot for me was the relevance of them sitting for that test. It's still relevant, and the most honest thing we can say is you have to build stamina for
Mhm,
test taking.
right.
That's true. And here's your baseline year. A year from now, when you are more literate and you do have more content, you don't want that to be the first time you're understanding the test environment. So there's a baseline, there's a recon mission. I'm going to have you go in and like learn about it. And then the true building the stamina of test taking. So that's one thing. We don't need to pity them that they're sitting through a couple of hours with everybody else. We just need to explain the reality. But the other thing is, what are the measures? Like you just gave one to your students, and I would have them, when I first met them, is there anything, and I could Xerox anything out of any book and just show it to them and ask them if they know any sounds or anything they can read at all. And often, whether they had literacy or not, that English text was not something that they could read yet. So there was nothing highlighted. We'd use a highlighter. Is there anything, the word I or anything, but that's okay. Because in the same vein, I would be like, we're going to put your name on this. We're going to put the date on this. And I promise you, if you engage, if you just attend to what we're doing, track the print with your eyes. When we all read together and it's safe, you can make attempts, all that out loud kind of stuff that is safe. But let Google read to you, track the print and all of that. In about a month, I could pull out a clean copy. Always, Larry, always there were more sounds and blends and words that they could identify, because they've been here a few weeks, and it's hard not to get the B from Burbank, the L from Luther Burbank,
Right.
it's hard not to, because they're in the environment and they're more low stress, and they can read the word I like, whatever it is. There's way more yellow on this copy than that one from a couple of weeks ago. And I
Right.
found it incredibly important to, and that takes 2 seconds, right? That would just take a couple of seconds. I would staple it, put the date on it, put it away. We'd do it again in about a month. And the way they would sit up straighter, because I think they don't realize that your growth is happening, and it's happening rapidly. It's just not showing up on some of the tests that we're taking in
Right.
this
Right.
class yet. I find that when I read what you write about giving those opportunities for people to feel like they're becoming better at this, and there's room and it's so doable, and in the future there's only going to be more success.
Yeah.
It's just so important. And if anybody looks at me funny, like, I mentioned video games.
Mhm.
Like the same student that you say gives up in your class, put them on a video game and watch them fail over and over and over. And they don't give up, because that level of the game has some little win. There's some little win. They haven't mastered the level, but they feel themselves getting better at it. Like your Pac-Man, if it only ate 3 every time, 3, 3, 3 only, you'd give it up. But no, you ate 5 this time, and then 7. It's that sense of I'm getting better at this. No,
Right. And speaking of video games, one of my students' favorite activities is to be able to play online video games, and I give them walkthroughs. I mean, they're like these escape the room games that online
nice
walkthroughs in English that they have to read in order
to play it.
to play it, right? And then they have a contest of who were the first 5 people to be able to get through it, and they're all helping each other figure it out. So I mean, it's really just a question. I mean, it's not just, but again, everybody is interested in something, right?
Yeah.
And we've got to figure out what that something is. If they want to be a doctor, then trying to figure out how these little, okay, then work our way backwards. What are the little goals that can help them get to the bigger goal? What we just got to find out what those things are, and
Hey,
they can change. And there are also some students who may be in a place where they really aren't feeling very motivated. They were forced to come to a new country, leave their friends, leave some of their family, a new culture, a new language, and they're not in a good space, right? And we have to be aware of that, create situations where people can write and draw about their home country and what brought them joy. Then at the same time, we need to be careful that we don't reignite traumatic experiences. And so we have to be careful about that. But trying to mine the background knowledge that people have. We have, a lot of our students, come from challenging environments. They do have a lot of resilience, I think, as well. But everybody's different,
That's right.
right? Right.
It's your
Uh,
best bet. It is your best bet, that relatedness piece, those relationships, opening a space, making sure they know that you are available, and not painting them all with the same brush, that just because they've been through something difficult, XYZ. Um, Having a safe space and a high bar in a relationship helps you find out who might need more than the other students in terms of someone to talk to, and things like that. I know it's your best bet. That's what we're doing, and that's one of the only things I feel like the pandemic really put a big bright light on. We need some social emotional things. We always have. We always have. It just started to get talked about, at least.
and of course, one major challenge facing teachers of newcomers in particular that I don't think is spoken about as much as it should be is the fact that many of us, will get a new student every week, if not every month, if not every week. And not only do we, and we have to integrate them in what we're doing in the class, but we've got to, figure out what their personal story is. There really isn't any other teacher in any other school that faces that challenge. All teachers get new students during the year, but not with the regularity or the quantity that an EL newcomer teacher will get. And that makes everything that we do, including dealing with motivational strategies, more complex.
More complex and more important than ever, with the world witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record ever. And it had the biggest jump last year that we'd seen, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. We keep hearing that we're seeing more and more, and it's true. But the reality is, we know how to serve these students. We know how. We've been doing that for a long time. And there's Garland ISD here in Texas. I had an episode I'll put in the show notes where they have a process where they have an ambassador at each school. It can be someone in the front desk. It can be a nurse. It really, she says, it needs to be a faculty member who wants this job. And this job is just eyes on the brand new students when they enroll. Yes, the central office does a welcome center, does an intake thing, and yes, they have an ESL teacher, but this is the person that makes a personal connection with the student and the family. And this is my phone number. Here's how you reach me if you have questions about anything. And she said herself, Margaret Retuquio is the person who put this program into place, that when she came to the United States, her country did not have an ambassador program. And she had so many questions, and she didn't know who to ask. And just if you have an ambassador, you know who to ask. And
Right.
so she said that alone, just the ambassador person, they do a little separate little intake and connect with the student. And then we were talking about this research by Claudius 2018 research on social connectedness and post-traumatic stress.
Mm.
And the research there suggests that social connectedness helps offset negative effects of post-traumatic stress. And so when you think about the whole school, like your high school, are there opportunities for kids to join clubs? And they may not be comfortable doing that right away,
Right,
but people are
right.
reaching out to let them know that that's a thing when they're ready, and trying to make relationships, the whole community doing things to help someone feel socially connected. The power of that, it is a bigger challenge than ever, and a bigger challenge for our EL teachers. Like you said, they're going to see the majority of those brand new kids who are coming in scared, quiet, but hopeful.
Mhm.
A lot of times they're hopeful. So I just want to lift you up because you're doing so much of that in your background as a community organizer and everything. It really plays into how great you are at what you do. And then beyond that, you help us do it better. You help us so much, Larry.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I also should point out that a few years ago, I told you I do these annual anonymous evaluations, and one of the students in their anonymous evaluation asked, "Well, how do you feel about Mr. Ferlazzo's teaching ability?" And the person wrote, "I give him an A for annoying." And I wrote about it in the blog, and then a few days later, the Washington Post picked it up. So if you look online, the headline in the Washington Post article says, "I give Mr. Ferlazzo an A for being annoying." So I try my best, but let's say there's not universal acclaim out there, though I think most students
Who
feel
has
good about
that? Who has that?
it.
I just rather follow the guy that's giving us the real deal. Here are some of the fails. Here are a bunch of the wins. Take what you can use. So we appreciate you so much. And I know how crazy busy you are. So coming on this show, really, we appreciate it so much. I will put links in the show notes for people to be able to download the free resources right away. If you're listening to this real time, I can tell you to go to Twitter, whether you're a Twitter person or not, just put the hashtag Motivation Handbook. Can you tell us a little bit about the slow chat that started yesterday?
Sure. I mean, over the next week, I'm just sharing short excerpts from the book, as well as links to longer excerpts that have appeared in EdWeek and Edutopia today, and will appear in Middleweb, and answering questions, and also inviting other teachers to share their own experiences and their successes in how they created the conditions in their classroom for intrinsic motivation to flourish.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. That is a fun thing. Just go search, even if it's beyond when we doing that. If you hear this show at a year from now or whenever, you could put in that hashtag Motivation Handbook and see some of the top tweets are still going to be out there, and you're going to be able to learn DIY kind of PD. And so thank you. You're just definitely a leader in that for us. Anything else? Can you tell people how to find you and how to follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I write a resource sharing blog, Larry Ferlazzo's websites of the day, and also write a teacher advice column for EdWeek, classroom Q&A. So welcome to connect in those places, or of course, Facebook. And the only thing I'd like to say is, for all ELL educators, I continue to think that the best professional development opportunities out there are what you and Tan and who else do you?
Katie Topol.
Katie, right? Katie also creates an annual online uh, conference
Yep.
that really is not, it was without parallel. And I guess you're going to be doing it in July, right? Is
We
that correct?
are. We're planning it right now. We're about to make the announcement about the keynotes, and we're looking to see how it makes sense. We're trying to listen to the field about what people would like to have, but it's unanimous from the feedback we get that they do want us to keep doing it. And so we appreciate that. You've been our keynote more than once. You're always there to help us with it. So thank you for that. We'll put links in that as well. Thank
Great.
you, Mary. Thank you so much for everything you do. I personally, again, have you in such high regard. Top tip
Well,
for everything.
we have a mutual admiration society.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Please get rest. We will hopefully see you over on the socials.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Larry. Bye-bye.
Bye.